Hi, Miss Mermaid here with a phenomenal lesson on super science. Today, we're going to learn about the smallest unit of life, the building blocks. I'm talking about cells, people. Cells. So there's two types that we're going to look at. There's cell specialization, where there can be nerve cells and skin cells and cardiac cells. But we're going to look at two main types. We have plant cells and animal cells. As you can see, we've got an animal cell over here and a plant cell over here to look at. Look at that. Cells. Woohoo. Okay. So cells, like I said, they're the smallest unit of life. What does that mean? Well, it's the smallest thing that can be alive. Now, you may have heard of atoms and molecules and things like that. They are smaller than cells, but they're not alive. So a cell is the smallest thing that's alive. And we know it's alive because it carries out certain life functions. But what we're going to focus on is the parts of cells, plant and animal cells. So a cell is filled with parts called organelles. It's kind of like organs for the cell. But these organelles do all the jobs that the cell needs to complete its life. So we have an animal cell is where we're going to start. So that's this circular one over here. So we're going to look at animal cells. Animal cells have a cell membrane. A cell membrane is like the outside of the cell. It's the gatekeeper. It controls what goes in and out. It's the border patrol. So if something, nutrients or water needs to get in the cell, it's the cell membrane that lets it in. If there's waste that needs to get out, it's the cell membrane that lets it out. Now there's other parts that control nutrients and waste and water, but the cell membrane is what actually allows things to go in or out. So that's on the outside of an animal cell. On a plant cell, it also has a cell membrane, but it's covered by a strong protective structure called a cell wall. That's this green rigid structure you're looking at here. That cell wall is simply for structure, protection, and support in plant cells. The main difference in plant and animal cells is that cell wall. Plant cells also have another special feature called chloroplasts. So those are these green dots. Chloroplasts are simply the site of photosynthesis. It's where photosynthesis happens. It's where plants make their own food in the chloroplast of a plant cell. So far, all we've talked about is an animal cell and a plant cell have a cell membrane that allows things in and out, but a plant cell has additional structures called the cell wall and chloroplast. The cell wall is just structure and support, and the chloroplast is where photosynthesis happens. So both cells have a nucleus. The nucleus is the brain of the cell. It tells everything else what to do, controls the cell's activities. So right here is the nucleus on the animal cell, and over here, it's right here on the plant cell. Inside the nucleus, there is a nucleolus, but we're going to focus more on just the nucleus. It takes over, it controls everything. It is the brain of the cell for both animal and plant cells. We then have mitochondria. I like to say mighty mitochondria. Mighty mitochondria. Now, why is the mitochondria so mighty? It's the powerhouse. It is what powers the cell because it takes nutrients and turns it into energy. And when I talk about nutrients, we're talking about a single cell here. Now, cells are microscopic. You can only see them under a microscope, typically. So nutrients for a cell is tiny. It's things we can't usually see. It's not like going and eating a meal. So that nutrients on that small, tiny cellular level is turned into energy in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria look like beans with squiggly lines. That's really what they look like. So here's your mitochondria over here, these blue mitochondria. They're over here in the plant cell. We can zoom in on that mitochondria. Very cool. And mitochondria is spelled really odd. It's spelled mitochondrion, but it's mitochondria or mitochondrion. So far we've talked about animal and plant cells. They both have a cell membrane, controls what goes in and out. The plant cell has the cell wall and chloroplast. Both have a nucleus. That's the brain, controls everything in the cell. And the mitochondria, they both have, that's the powerhouse, turns nutrients into energy. The next thing we're going to look at is the vacuole. Vacuole, an easy way to remember this is it sounds like a vacuum. So what do vacuums do? They suck up stuff. So vacuums suck up stuff. A vacuole does store waste, water, and nutrients. It takes care of all of those things. So it's a big storage sac or a large bubble in the cell, kind of, that holds food, water, or nutrients, water, and waste. Now, in plant cells, the vacuole is much larger. This right here is the vacuole because plant cells hold more water, whereas over here, the vacuole is much smaller. These little, let's see if we can find, there's one. Why does this picture not have a good vacuole on it? I mean, this could even be a vacuole. Oops, right there. So a vacuole in plants is much smaller than it is in plants. I'm saying that wrong. I'm sorry. In plants is much larger than it is in animal cells. Animal cells are smaller vacuoles. Plant cells, larger vacuoles. So we've got vacuoles, mitochondria, nucleus, cell membrane, and in plant cells, cell wall, and chloroplast. The other thing we're going to talk about, we're going to keep it very basic, is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is that jelly-like fluid. So it's squishy, it's like gel, it's kind of like cool slime inside the cell. And all of the organelles, that's all the parts we're talking about, sit in the cytoplasm. And it separates all the organelles from the nucleus. It's all the space inside the cell here. So all the space inside the cell where there's no organelles. That's the cytoplasm, the jelly-like fluid. Important. It's nutrient-filled fluid. It's awesome. So the other thing we need to talk about is how do you tell the difference in the animal and plant cell? Well, we talked about the plant cell having a cell wall and chloroplast. When you're looking at a diagram, it's pretty easy to tell them apart because usually they make a plant cell green. Plant cells usually have a more rigid structure. You can see how this plant cell is a little more square and the animal cell is more round. We know that we can look at the vacuole. The vacuole is going to be significantly larger in a plant cell. Now, if you're looking at them under a microscope, you're going to have, under a microscope, it's going to look more square-like, and you'll be able to see the rigid cell wall, and it's going to be more round for an animal cell. So shape and color are good things to determine if you're looking at plant or animal, but they're not the first things. The first thing we look for are the cell wall and the chloroplast, and then we can go to structure or shape to tell if it's a plant or an animal cell. So let's really quickly recap. Animal cells and plant cells both have a cell membrane, which controls what goes in and out of the cell. They both have a nucleus. That's the brain of the cell, controlling all the cell's activity. They both have vacuoles that have water, waste, and nutrients. It's a storage for all of those, a big storage unit for water, waste, and nutrients. They both have mitochondria. That is mighty mitochondria, the powerhouse, because it turns nutrients into usable energy for that cell. And then we know the plant cell has the chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthesis, and the cell wall for protection, structure, and support. There are other organelles. You can even see them on this picture, like the Golgi apparatus. That's a fun one to say. Ribosomes on the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Peroxisomes, lysosomes, all of those things. And they are important parts of the cell. But for right now, this is where we're going to start. So, cells, they're made of organelles. It's been wonderful teaching and talking with you today. Have an amazing day.